Again, this is Eric Burton, CEO here at AHI. I'll just go around the table quick and let you know who's in the room. Jeff Hiscox.
Nancy Gilbert, please. Mary McLaughlin. Sarah Wright. Rebecca Bigelow.
Justine Moses.
Katie Cook.
Peter Olszewski. We're going to jump in. There is, just again for additional logistics, the ability to type a question in if you're on the webinar. So we are monitoring that here on this end as well. So if you have any audio difficulties hearing us or have questions, you can use that question button on the screen. So again, we're going to jump into the slides, and then we'll open it up at the end for some questions and answers. Okay, so for the topics we're going to go through today, again, thank you everybody for joining. As announced on the July 11th AHI Informa, we're holding this webinar here today to help address questions on the 95.5 requirement and to provide consistent messaging on the topic. Obviously, there'll be additional conversations throughout the partner meetings and FIN structure. We wanted to be able to start here today with a standard, consistent messaging, and obviously there'll be a host of follow-up conversations on the topic. So what we wanted to run through today, you can see the different topics that we plan on going through in the slide deck, a recap of what the 95.5 requirements are, compliance background, highlights from the May 8th All PPS meeting in Albany, kind of analyzing the way the IA is looking at this, our current state, and then the decision points that have been made recently and the next steps that we need to take. And then, as I mentioned, we'll open up at the end for some Q&A. Just to set some high-level kind of goals for the call, looking at it is providing some background, where have we been, what's our current status, and where do we need to go. And before I go into the slides, I do just want to set the stage that we all share in some of the frustrations and concerns around this topic. So when I say all, including the AHI leadership, AHI staff, AHI board of directors, we all share in the concerns and frustrations on this topic. And we do understand some of the burdens this may be placing on the non-safety net partners to stay engaged with the program and to continue to move some of the initiatives forwards. What we'll start to walk through today is how do we collectively come up with alternatives to ensure that we can continue funds flow to the non-safety net partners. So again, just want to set that stage before we got too far into the slide deck. So on slide, this current slide, the special terms and conditions, just a recap of what the requirement is. So this is an exact language from the STCs. You can see the web link there if you wanted to see the full document of the special terms and conditions. We've highlighted here a couple words and a sentence that is important to note that if you read the language here, obviously it's saying that non-qualifying providers can participate in a PPS in the DSRIP program, but payments can total no more than 5% of the project valuation. So this has been kind of a long-standing question around what the target is. The language to us seems pretty clear that it's based on valuation. As you'll see in some future slides, we'll discuss that a little further on how currently the IA is viewing that. And then the second piece highlighted the sentence there around there can be approval to go above that 5% if it's in the best interest of the Medicaid attributed members. And so there's been some long-standing questions around, so how do we, what's the mechanics to basically show that and illustrate that? So again, we'll talk about that in a moment on one of the future slides.
This is Sarah Wright. We did have a question. I just want to chime in that we do have participants on the call that are both from non-safety net providers and safety net providers. We've opened it to all, and when we looked at the participant list, we do have providers and partners in both areas that are participating.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide, slide 4, just want to do a little bit of a recap of where we've been. So the far left of this highlights and folks that are in various steering committee and have attended various FIN meetings and so forth, it's seen much of this information in the past. I'll just quickly go through it. Some highlights of discussions that we had with both DOH officials and Haney's in the March of 2019 timeframe. At that time, as you recall, we were holding back some of the P4P distributions with some concerns over bumping up against the 95.5 requirement and looking for some additional guidance. As we had those discussions, some of the clear message we received was to focus on the intent of the rule, to advise to build our case as to why it's in the best interest of the Medicaid population to be out of compliance, and where we would make that case in the quarterly reporting process, and even getting to the point of advising that we were being a little overly conservative in holding payments to non-safety nets at that point. And then the final bullet there around risk of take back on the 95.5 topic, being advised that it was a minimal risk for this issue, and that it's really focused around AVs earned by the PPS that are not warranted, and even just some discussion around some of the STCs not really defining a mechanism for the take back. So I'm not going to rehash that in much more detail than folks have seen that previously. So the steps we took in the spring of 19 from those discussions, where we did go ahead and release the DY3 P4P installment 1 payments to non-safety net partners. We did continue to leverage downstream agreements where we had a few in place and did have some success in that with a few partners. And then we then also moved ahead upon receipt of the next DSRIP payment. We did move ahead with the DY3 P4P installment 2 for both the PPS pool and the partner pools. And then the FINs began their process of the FIN pool determination for that FIN pool, and that was being done before the May 8th all PPS meeting in Albany. And we had teed up approval at the May board meeting, the approval of those FIN determinations. So again, that's just a quick recap of where we were in the spring of 2019 on the topic. So next slide, slide 5. And then as we attended the all PPS meeting in Albany on May 8th, the independent assessor went through a presentation on the 95.5 topic. And again, I'm not going to read through every bullet here, since many folks have seen this in the past, but the highlights here were really reminding the PPS in the audience that the 95.5 requirement is part of the STCs. Also making it clear that it's only applicable to first-tier distributions. In other words, it's direct distribution. If there's second-tier funds flow, the 95.5 does not apply to that. The middle bullet there with the bold, making a clear statement to the PPS audience that they may be required to return any funds in excess of the 5% limit. So this was clearly something that had not been explicitly laid out to the PPS had previously to that, and some discussion from DOH officials has seen some change in audit approaches, which was leading to some of the IA interpretation of this. As you can see on the bottom of the slide, as we sit currently, there's only 6 out of 25 PPSs in the state that are in compliance with the 95.5 regulation. The IA is committing to work with PPSs to help make any changes in previously adjusted reports, and then the final note there, just this clearly was a fairly high energy conversation at the all PPS meeting, with some interpretation on the PPS side that it was a little bit of a pivot in stance, and some disagreement on the interpretation of the STCs. So next slide. So from the May 8th meeting, we also had some additional follow-up conversation with the IA as they committed to work individually with PPSs. And this slide here, we're highlighting some of the key points from that. And the first two are fairly significant points that in the view of the IA, the safety net status in the way they're measuring this is how it's indicated on the partner network reporting tool. So I think we all know there's various lists that exist out on DOH websites and other places that show safety net status that may not tie to that network reporting tool, but that is the tool that the IA is using to measure the compliance. And then the second point there, at this point in time in the DSRIP program, that tool cannot be updated, or the safety net status cannot be updated at this point in the DSRIP program. The valuation bullet on the third one, the IA's stance on this is taking a very conservative approach and using the word valuation to look at dollars that have currently been earned and distributed by the PPS versus the valuation that many PPSs view as the award letter valuation amount back from the beginning stages of the DSRIP program. The next two bullets talk about some mechanisms that are now available to adjust reports, and AHI has taken some initial steps with that. We do have some additional clarification that we're awaiting on where we've been able to show some change in status of safety net for certain partners, and we're looking for some guidance on when that has occurred. How do we then update the reporting tool to reflect that? I do want to note at the bottom of this slide here that this is the IA's interpretation and guidance on the topic that may or may not align. If there is an audit in relation to the 95.5 requirement, that may not align to the various audit teams that may come into an audit. So I just want to make that point. This is the IA's interpretation of the guidance, but the IA would not be the group that would audit for this topic. So next slide. So this slide here, we wanted to just kind of set the stage for where we are currently with the safety net, non-safety net distribution. And on the far left, the lower pie chart there shows current state where 87% of the funds flow has gone out to safety net partners and 13% to non-safety net. So I think this clearly illustrates the commitment that the AHI PPS has to flowing dollars to the non-safety nets. We've seen graphs presented at the state level to show the 25 PPSs and where we stack, and we are at the high end of the percentage of dollars that we've distributed to non-safety net partners. So again, to repeat myself, clearly illustrating our commitment to the non-safety net partners in our network. All that being said, given the messages that we've heard recently from the all PPS meeting from the IA, we need to do something different going forward in order to get closer to the 95.5 compliance. And whether you use the valuation definition or whether you use the funds earned and released to date, we have to, again, do something different to become closer in compliance with that 95.5 topic. The far right pie chart on this slide shows the distribution of non-safety net dollars by sector. And so as we were preparing kind of the documentation to look at, why we felt it was in the best interest of the Medicaid population to make the steps that we've taken as a PPS to flow dollars out, the bottom two slices of the pie illustrate just in two sectors between the non-safety net primary care providers we have in the PPS and the safety net partners that appear on some other DOH list as safety net, but not in the network reporting tool. That looking at basically 45% of those dollars that we flowed out to non-safety net being captured just in those two areas, and felt pretty confident that we could illustrate a case as to what we've done to date was in the best interest of the Medicaid population. And using just those two slices of the pie would put us in much closer to compliance, even using the IA's more conservative definition. So that kind of just sets the stage on where we are current status. And then the next slide, what we tried to illustrate here is where we've been over the last couple months and the board discussions on this, and then where we need to go over the next few months to work through this. I'm just going to pause for a second and let me ask the team to chime in if you feel like I missed anything through the first 7 slides.
No, I'll just take the opportunity, since we have a little break, to go back to slide 6 for a second and just highlight the first bullet that's noted. So we did have a partner question come in advance of today's call asking about what if I'm not designated a safety net, but I do operate in a similar fashion to a safety net. I clearly work with the Medicaid population. There are direct ties and connections with my work to this population. And this is something that we've highlighted on the FAQ document, which we'll touch on later today. Really, the first 3 questions touch on this, that ultimately we are graded, in essence, by the partner network list on the DOH website. So regardless of the touch points that you make to the population, or if you are listed as a safety net on a different DSRIP list, unfortunately, we are bound to what each partner's status is on the partner network reporting tool. And we'll probably circle back to that again later, because I know there are several examples where there can be kind of questions around, can I still be considered a safety net even though I'm not technically a safety net? And unfortunately, again, it goes back to the safety net designation within this partner network tool, which to the second bullet, we are unable to change at this point. Though we have asked several times and we're trying to work through different nuances, the guidance to date has been that we are not able to change any statuses as they sit on that report currently.
All right, thanks, Sarah. So again, jumping back to slide 8, where we've been over the last couple months with board discussions and decisions coming out of the board, and then where do we need to go in the future on this. So just recapping the May 21st AHI Board of Directors meeting, as I mentioned earlier, we were in process of the DY3 P4P determinations for the installment 2 before the meeting of May 8th down in Albany. So those were teed up and on the agenda for that May 21st board meeting. From the updates and discussions from the IA, we had a very lengthy discussion at the AHI board, almost an hour discussion just on this topic alone. And at the end of it, landed on the decision that we were able to approve and release the safety net partner determinations, but given the feedback from that May 8th meeting, unable to approve the non-safety net partner determinations, and asking the management team to evaluate options and hold that follow-up discussion with the IA and bring additional information back to the board the following month. And again, I just want to highlight, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, a clear understanding of some of the burden this may be placing on safety net partners, and the board again had a very lengthy conversation about this. This was a very difficult decision, but at the end of the day, the board holding a fiduciary responsibility, given the information we have in our hands at this point, being asked to approve dollars that in the IA's eyes are not in compliance was just not a step that could be taken. So then as we moved into the June 18th, 2019 AHI board meeting, again, we brought back some additional information from that conversation with the IA at the end of May, also provided some additional analysis on where we were with the 95.5 compliance. With that, we also sought some clarification on the approach of previously awarded innovation funds for non-safety net partners. And then the last 2 bullets there, just again echoing that, unable to continue approval of highlighted their direct funds flow to non-safety net partners. So again, going back to what counts as compliance, if there's second-tier funds flow, that is allowable, but the direct funds flow has to meet that 95.5 requirement. So the stance that we're at now is that we're unable to continue to approve direct funds flow to non-safety net partners. The last bullet in the June 18th is also a fairly significant point. We will be taking a very conservative approach with our contingency funds to make sure that we provide resources to the region for any potential exposure on this. So in other words, what we're saying here is we will make sure that the contingency dollars sit at a point, if we have concerns, there may be a take back, that will be the first line of defense for that within the AHI PPS. So the next 2 pillars of this slide then start to move into, where do we need to go going forward on this. So we have the pending DY3 P4P fin pool determinations for that installment 2. So, we're going to be returning and working with the 5 fins of which partners are directly impacted by this and dollars that were unable to be distributed. We'll leverage the fin structure, the triad leadership team, the AHI leadership, to talk through approaches on how we can continue to flow the funds to those non-safety nets, but it cannot be, again, a direct funds flow. The bolded bullet, the third one down, we really need to encourage the downstream agreements. And we've had, again, limited success in that to date as a PPS, but this is an avenue that allows funds to continue to flow to those non-safety nets, and we really need to encourage those downstream agreements, and we will do the best that we can do to help assist to develop those relationships and to have those agreements executed. The last bullet there is, if we're unable to facilitate downstream type agreements or some other solution, at this point, the determination is that we would redistribute those initial determinations, and we'll be working on a timeline for that as to what our expectation will be as to how long of a time we're going to give this to be developed. And then as we move into the future distributions, DY4 and DY5, we're clearly going to have to identify and evaluate alternative approaches for this, but we will be holding to that board discussion that we're unable to do direct funds flow to non-safety net partners in those methodologies. We'll continue to encourage the downstream agreements, and again, leverage the thin structure, the PPS, various PPS committees, triad leadership, and AHI leadership in developing those alternative approaches. And so you can see some of the theme there in several of the bullets on those FAR 2 pillars is, as I mentioned early on, we need to collectively figure out how we're going to continue to be able to leverage dollars and keep non-safety nets engaged and provide resources to them. So that in about 20 minutes is our high-level review of where we've been, where we are currently on it, and where we need to go over the next several months on this topic. Just on the last slide, if folks are not aware, we have posted, just pull the last slide up, gives you the link to where the FAQ document is posted. So we do have an FAQ document that currently is posted that has about a dozen questions on it and our responses to that. So we tried to capture some of the key topics and thoughts on questions we've heard from partners to date. We encourage you to continue to submit questions, and we will update the FAQ document and keep it posted on the website. Just to highlight a couple of the themes of the questions, which we have covered in the presentation, but just to highlight it again, is there opportunities to appeal the non-safety net status, and or if you appear on some other safety net status list, what does that mean from the standpoint of the IA? That is not something that we can explore at this point. So again, to repeat what we talked about in the slides, it's the status as it sits on the network reporting tool. That is the important status. A couple other questions to point out. Again, we highlighted this on the previous slide of the structure that we're going to use to try to facilitate the downstream agreements. So we do have a template that can be provided. Reach out through the DSRIP AHI address there if you want to have a copy of the template. And then again, we'll work through the various fin structure and the leadership team to help partners in developing those relationships. So I'm going to pause there, and we do want to leave a few minutes to open up the line. So we're going to take folks off mute, I believe. So we're going to open it up and take a few questions. And again, you can also just send questions through the email address as listed on the last slide, and we will continue to update the FAQ document as we receive questions. So let me pause first for anybody on the AHI team that wants to add some additional comments, and then we'll open the floor up for questions.
So I think what you're seeing on the screen now is the version of the FAQ document that you can find out on the AHI website. And I just wanted to note that on the link that's provided, when you go to that web page, it'll be in the left corner under policies and procedures. It's the second document listed. So that should be able to be pulled up. We did have a question, are there any downstream agreements currently in place? So as Eric mentioned, we have had limited success with this. For the most part, we've been able to identify connections between partners on a more project-based role and less on a generic, let's flow all funds through to a non-safety net provider. But that's something that I think we're going to have to shift our focus towards to find some of those more direct linkages to make partners on both ends feel comfortable moving forward.
It looks like there's a question on the take back and AHI's stance with the contingency fund. Does that include funds to include a possible take back from partners? Again, what we're trying to establish is to be conservative with that contingency fund, to leave a level there that we feel may be exposure on this. So again, that would be defense, and we would hope that the take back would start with the PPS and not reach the partner level.
Looks like we have a question. Annette Osborne, if you would like to go ahead and share your question over the line.
Yeah, I'm back on the downstream. So you're saying you've had limited success or limited experience. Is there any model that seems to be working anywhere? Or is it just not happening anywhere at this point?
Again, we have a handful of downstream agreements that we've executed at the AHI PPS, and we do know there's other PPSs that have used the downstream concept. We've had limited success at the AHI PPS to reach a point where partners are feeling comfortable taking on that downstream responsibility. So,
I have not been in the loop on that anywhere, other than I've heard it mentioned before. So what would be my best approach to get direction in searching for someone that I can attempt to partner with?
Okay, so again, we can provide the template of the agreement so you can start to get familiar with what the agreement looks like, and then use the fin structure and the executive director lead in your fin to start those conversations, and again, we're willing to help where we can on that.
So say that again. We'll work at the fin level. Yes. Yep.
So the executive director in your fin would be the first contact, and again, we'll help you with those conversations as well from the centralized AHI leadership standpoint.
Okay. That's the fin meeting that we canceled over the summer? Yes. So the next one's in the fall. Am I correct there?
Very possible. So in that case, I would reach out to the executive director. Okay, so Megan Murphy would be the best point of contact for starting those conversations, and then Megan can bring them back with the group if we need to come up with other ideas internally to help make this.
Okay. Okay.
If you need any contact information, just send it through that DSRIP email address that's listed on the slides, and we're happy to make any email introductions if need be.
Okay. I'm trying to not reinvent the wheel. So if there was like a primary care agreement with some other organization in somewhere that might be, hey, try this because it's working over here, that would be helpful.
So again, we do have a template, and I will say, primary care downstream has been one of the more challenging ones. We do not have currently a primary care one in place. So that will be something we're going to have to work with you on to try to figure out how we make that happen.
Okay.
And I think to answer the second part of your question more broadly outside of AHI, we have heard from the state that other organizations or other PPSs are doing downstream agreements, but we have not been able to get additional details around what those agreements look like or the successes. So we've been trying to collaborate with other PPSs, to your point, to share and learn their experiences, but right now there's been limited information that we've been able to obtain outside of our own PPS.
Okay.